Welcome. We'll be starting shortly. Welcome, everybody, on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I am pleased to welcome you to our discussion with Martha Sternbach, a Holocaust survivor from Hungary. Before we begin, I would like to share a brief history of the museum. Holocaust Museum LA was the first Holocaust survivor founded Holocaust museum in the United States. In the 1960s, a group of survivors worked together to create a memorial for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust, and this memorial eventually became Holocaust Museum LA. These survivors did this at a time when the community was by and large not yet ready to face this tragic history. In the 1960s, the Holocaust had only ended about 15 years ago. Thanks to their courage and their foresight, these survivors established not only the first Holocaust museum in the United States, but one whose mission would always be to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. In order to fulfill their mission, they mandated that the museum should always be free to the public, making Holocaust education accessible to everyone. And for the time being, since we are not in the museum's physical space, we're still able to carry forward their mission on a daily basis. This morning, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Martha Sternbach, who will share her story with you. Afterwards, you can type in your questions and she will answer as many as possible. Those watching on Zoom can use the Q&A box, and those watching on Facebook can type your questions in the comments. Martha is truly an important part of our community, and she has always participated for the last few years in all of our educational programs. And it's really my honor to welcome her this morning to giving her talk and to sharing her story with you. Martha, thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your story this morning.
Thank you for coming. I wish I could see everybody, but I do my best. So I was born in a country named Hungary. I was born in a small town in 1926, where my father was born, and my mom came from the city. It wasn't too far. Whenever I wanted to visit my grandma, I would ride my bicycle. It took about an hour with the bicycle. And I had a sister, Lillian, 2 years older, and a brother, Ernie, 2 years younger. And we didn't have a public school. So I attended a Catholic school, and everybody got their own. We never had any problem. We respected one another. There was never any problem. And we know everybody in town, and everybody knew my family because my father had a store and everybody shopped in our store. And it was such a peaceful town, really have good memories. My favorite memory is from Christmas time, and we have Hanukkah time because my father would bring in toys to sell, and the children were happy. I always think that when the children are happy, everybody is happy. But then we started to hear rumors in 1940. People sometimes escaped from Poland and from Czechoslovakia. They were saying terrible thing was happening when the Nazis invaded the country. And they came to Hungary because they felt safe in Hungary. But the things started to change. The first change came in Hungary in 1942. There was a new law. If a Jewish person wanted to buy a home or any other property, they could only buy it if nobody else wanted it. And my father wanted to enlarge the store, and there was a house for sale on Main Street. So he went to the mayor's office and asked the mayor if he could buy that home. And the mayor said, no problem. And he asked my father for a certain amount of money. And in a small town, we had the business in the front and our living quarters in the back. And we moved into the home, but we didn't even live there for a year when we got this registered letter that we have to move out because someone was at home. That was very upsetting. But what my father said, maybe if things start to change, maybe we better off not to live on Main Street. So we rented a house and moved in. And things was still quiet in my hometown. And in 1943, my father was called into the army. You know, my father was a medic in World War I. My father came to America in 1910. He went to medical school in New York. He had two older sisters married and an older brother married. When they find out that my grandma was sick, my father went home for a visit and he couldn't come back anymore because in 1914, World War I broke out. That's when he was in the army, he was a medic. And when he was called into the army in 1943, he was in uniform. But after 6 months, they sent him home. He was considered too old. He was 52 that time because all the young Jewish men were taken in for slave labor. They were slaves to the Hungarian army, did all kind of work, building roads and bridges. And in my hometown, it was still quiet. And then in 1944 April, there was a new law that all the Jewish people have to wear a yellow star when we go out. I remember going out the first time with the yellow star on me. I went to visit a friend. She fell and she had a cast on her legs. And while I was visiting, her mother made a remark. She said, I don't know how we're going to run with Amy with a cast on her legs. I couldn't understand why she said that. And when I went home, I asked my parents, and they said they don't know why she said something like that. And you know, we have our holiday, Passover, just we have it right now, sometimes the same time as Easter. We celebrate for 8 days. And for the first 2 days, we don't travel. The men go to the synagogue. And every year we would hire a carriage and we go to visit my grandma and all the other relatives would come. And I asked my parents, because usually we were talking about it, planning it. And I asked my parents if we're going to go this year. They told me we're not going this year. I still can explain to myself. I was so determined. I told them, but I'm going to go with the bicycle. Not only my grandmother lived in the city, but I had a cousin and she was married to the rabbi and her husband was taken away and she had 4 young children. And I did go with the bicycle, but just before the city, there was a highway and I had to stop. The first time I saw the Nazis with jeeps and motorcycles. And when the convoy passed by, I continued. And that was the last time I saw my grandma and my cousin with the children. And we finished our holiday. I don't know if anybody knows, for 8 days, we don't need bread. I don't know if it's from the Bible, where Moses take the children of Israel out of Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt and they were trying to bake bread, but there was not enough time for the dough to rise. So they baked it, probably looked like a pita bread. So we commemorate that and we don't need bread for 8 days. And right after the holiday, we got a messenger from the mayor's office that by nightfall, we have to be all in the synagogue. We had 16 Jewish families in town. And you know, when the young men were taken away, my mom made sure that their wife and children have everything that they needed. And this time too, she said, I'm going to go to Mrs. Fried. She has all those young children. I want to make sure those children have enough clothes and shoes. You know, we didn't have those plastic bags those days. We had baskets. So she went into the store and she filled up a basket with shoes and clothes for the children. And by nightfall, we were all in the synagogue. You know, we didn't have any bread yet in the house. And I know I don't think I ate anything that day. It was a very emotional day. So, but our friends or neighbors were very kind and they were bringing milk and bread into the synagogue that night. And my mom had on a gold watch and a ring, and my father took it away from her and he put it into one of those hanging chandeliers in the synagogue. And he told each of us, if any of you come back, you know where that valuable watch and ring is. So we spent the night in the synagogue. And the next morning, carriages came to take us away. And there was a young clergyman in town. He was a very good friend of my parents. He came that morning and shook hands with all of us and wished us good luck. And now the carriages took us to a train station and the train took us to the city where the ghetto was. You know what a ghetto is? Just a couple of streets where all the Jewish people stayed. So 5 of my family members, we were put into this 1-bedroom apartment owned by the young couple. And the young couple, her parents with a sister, and another couple with a son. Because we didn't have a bed to sleep in, we just slept on the floor on some blankets. The only thing we did is we had a community kitchen, and like my mother always tried to help everybody. So when we saw young women with little children, we tried to help. Everyone helped one another. And after 2 weeks, they were making the ghetto smaller. This time we slept in an attic on some straw. Well, it was very difficult to sleep because it was very close to the train station and the train was whistling all night. And after 2 weeks, they told us we're going to leave the ghetto. This time they put us into cattle cars. I don't know how many of us, we couldn't sit down, we just stand next to each other. And they gave us a bucket to use as a bathroom. And after a couple of hours, people just collapsed on one another. Children were crying. And the train had to stop every once in a while to empty those buckets. I can't remember how long we were going. When finally the train stopped, it was still very early in the morning. It was very dark outside. All we saw this young men in striped uniform. They called them capos. And they were yelling in German, heraus, schnell heraus, everybody out fast. And they were separating the men from the women. They were rushing us, so we didn't even have a chance to say goodbye to my father and my brother. My sister and I was holding on to my mom, and this couple asked my mom in German how old she was. You know, the second language was German in Hungary, and my mom spoke very good German. My mom was only 42, and I have no idea why she said 52. And as soon as she said that, he pushed her to the left, and even before we asked what's going on, he said, don't worry, you're going to see her later. Now we were in Poland now, and the concentration camp called Auschwitz, and they were rushing us to go in further. As it was getting lighter, we could make out those very high wire fences, and behind that wooden barracks with brick chimneys. And they were rushing us to go fast. We came to the area that's called Birkenau. We came to a large building. There were 2 girls, one older, but her name was Miri. They called her the Blockerteste. And a young girl, she was about my age, her name was Gerdi. And they told us to go inside the building. When we were inside, they told us we have to take off all your clothes. There were hooks on the wall, just hold on to our shoes, and we had to stay in line. I was looking ahead and I saw this couple shaving off the girl's hair. I couldn't understand. I thought maybe they were dirty. Well, they shaved all our hair off, and whenever we had hair. And when everybody was done, we went outside. And just before we went into the next building, front of the building, there was a very large cement container, this white liquid. I heard them yelling something I couldn't understand. Gertie hit me with a strap, and she pushed my hand down where I was holding my shoes. This was to disinfect the shoe in that white liquid. Then when we went inside, it was a shower room. There were shower heads on the ceiling. I could tell you, up until then, we were together families. We tried to be brave, no matter how difficult things were. We never complained. But it's still hard for me to remember when that cold water was coming down on my face, my tears were falling because I couldn't understand why this was happening. This was like the worst nightmare, but unfortunately it was real. And when they stopped the water, we didn't have anything to wipe ourselves with. And when we looked at one another, you hardly recognized your own sister without the hair. And there was another room, we went in there. There was a long table, and the table had dresses on. They told us, put your shoes on and take a dress. But they were always rushing us. You couldn't see if the dress fit you or didn't fit you the right way. You just had to do it very fast. And when everybody was dressed up, then they took us into the area where I saw those barracks. They called the sea lager, and they were numbered. The barracks were numbered. They put us into this barrack 18. We went inside, we saw this wooden beds, 3 layers, no cushion, no cover. I'm still not sure if that was 10 or 12 girls on each layer, and from my hometown, there were 2 other girls my age, my sister and I, and 2 girls 10 years older. And we always tried to stay together because every morning we had to go outside. They were counting us. They called that sail appel. First Miri counted us and the SS counted us. And in the morning, they would give us a little black coffee with a piece of bread. At lunchtime, again, we had to go outside. They were counting us again. At lunchtime, they gave us some kind of a soup, 1 round dish, no spoon. We just had to drink from that and pass it around. But the air had such a terrible odor, So in the beginning, when we weren't that hungry, we just couldn't eat that soup. But I could tell you later on, we were so hungry that we couldn't worry about the smell or the taste. We just had to eat whatever they gave us. And at night again, we had to be outside. They counted us again. And sometimes if a girl didn't feel good, they stayed in the bathroom or in the barracks. We had to stay outside until everybody was fine and counted. And next door to us, we could see them through the wire. They gave us hope because there were some older and very young women. They were dressed up very nice, but their face looked so strange, They looked like wax. And one night we heard a lot of crying and screaming. During the night we were not allowed to go out from the barracks. And the next morning the whole area was empty. They called it the Lager. I don't know if anybody heard of Dr. Mengele. He was the doctor that came to select girls for work. And every time they selected a girl, they put them into the Lager and they put numbers on their arms. I was selected many a times. My sister was as healthy as I was, but he was very thin. But while we were in the sea lager, you could change places with one another. So we managed to stay together. When we came to Auschwitz-Birkenau, it was the beginning of June. And now it was getting very cold in the morning, especially. It was in the beginning of October. But every time we were separated from my sister, and when we get back together again, she would tell me, if one day we cannot get back together, if it's possible for me to go with our friends from my hometown. But now it was October and we were still together with our friends, and they told us we're going to leave the sea lager. And we thought wherever they take us, we're going to stay together. But again, we had to get undressed, and that's the way they were selecting girls for work. And if those girls were thin when we got to Auschwitz-Birkenau, they were even much thinner now. And the girls that were too thin, they were not selected for work. There was a little booth, and they were pushing the girls into that little booth. And when I saw them pushing my sister, I ran to Miri. I said to Miri, I really want to be with my sister. Can I go with her, or she could go with me? And she looked at me and she said to me, you're not being fair. She's so thin, they're going to take her someplace that there is going to be more food, so she should gain weight. I wish I could explain this. I was so naive or just plain stupid that I believed Miri what she told me. I believed her when she told me that she's going to be in a better place where they have more food. And this time they gave me a pair of wooden shoes, a dress, and even a coat. And I was staying with a group of girls one side, and my friends from my hometown were in a different group. Many girls changed places with one another. I could have changed places and go with them. I have no explanation why I didn't. Only after the war, I find that only 2 survived from that group. And then they gave us and many times I asked, did you ever see things that you look at it and you don't believe what you're saying? While we were standing outside there was an open truck passing by with naked bruised bodies. I looked at it, I couldn't believe what I was saying. And then all of a sudden we saw some women, older and very young, dressed up very nice. The sisters recognized their aunt from Budapest and they were calling her name. She was looking around very confused. But every time we saw people dressed up very nice, we thought they gave us hope. We thought they lived there. And then they gave us a little package of crackers and cheese, and they took us to a train station. but we didn't go too far. When we got off from the train, there were three civilian men. They owned the factory. They looked us over and they okayed for us to go to work in a factory. So we went back in the train again, and this time the train took us inside Germany. I can't remember how long we were going. When the train stopped, they told us this town called Altenburg. That's where the munition factory was. And every morning, this older German soldiers, sometimes women in uniform, they would take us to work in a factory. And because they considered me between the young ones, in 1944 November, I became 18. So I didn't work on a very heavy machine, just standing in front of the table. And there was a wooden tray, and the tray contained these round black metal pieces. We had to examine it. If it was damaged, we had to take it out from the tray. That's what we did all day. And watching us work, if I'm going to say an old German lady, I guess when you're 18, even 50 seems old. I have no idea how old she was. But I want to remember her because she was very, very kind to us. At Christmas time, she bought us each a little apple. And there was a very pretty young lady also watching us work. And she would always whisper to us that her brother is in the army. And he wrote that the war is going to be over soon and we're going to be okay. I'm sorry, I have to take a little water. And during the night, we heard a lot of noises, planes go by and all kind of noises. We weren't allowed to go out during the night. And now it was already April 1945. They told us we're going to leave the factory. It was very interesting. As we were starting to walk, march, we had a couple of these older German soldiers, a couple of women in uniform. And the men had little white flag in their hands, and the women put on this white kerchief on their head. We had no idea why. But on the road, it was such a chaos. We saw German people running from all sides. Some had a little bundle, some had a little suitcase, some was pulling a little cart. We had no idea what was going on. I can't remember how long we kept on going. And finally, they told us we're going to stop here. This town called Waldenburg. They told us there is a lot of shooting going around and we don't want to hit by a bullet. So they told us to go up to these hills and lay down flat. I remember laying there and all of a sudden I saw a young German soldier with a machine gun. For a minute I thought maybe he came to kill us. Later on we find out that the liberators were coming, so he was trying to hide, run away. It was very difficult for me. I missed my sister. And as we were laying there during the night, all of us were from the same region in Hungary. And most of the people know my family because my uncle was a chief rabbi in Hungary. So everybody knew my sister. We were the nieces of Rabbi Polak's nieces. So I met these four sisters. They were older than I was, and another girl from their hometown. And during the night, we were talking to each other. I guess they felt sorry for me. And by the morning, we kind of became friends. When we came down from those hills the next morning, it was 1945, April the 13th. And there was a road there, and we saw this jeep coming, and it stopped. It was a British soldier. We were so hungry, and he had a lot of boxes in the jeep. First, it looked like maybe he's going to open a box and give us something. Of course, he had no idea who we were, so he just got back in the jeep and left. Now, 6 of us girls decided to go into town to find something to eat. As we were walking in town, there was a little house and the window opened up, and this lady asked us to come in. We went inside, and she said, "I know you must be hungry. I have some food for you." And she showed us the bathroom to wash up. While we were in Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Nazis used to call us lazy Jews. We were very clean when we were in Auschwitz-Birkenau. But unfortunately, in the end, we were full of lice because we just had one dress. We could never wash it or take a shower. So we just washed our hands, and she gave us something to eat. And she told us that her husband and her son was in the army. And then she said, "I have a room for you, my son's room. You're welcome to stay here." Well, we really didn't have anywhere else to go. So we spent the night, but in the morning, we decided not to impose on her any longer. We just thanked her and we left. I could tell you, I never forgot her, how important it is was that she was so kind to us. You know, it was hard to believe. And you have to learn from that how important it is if you could help one another to be kind to one another. You know, I never forgot those three ladies. I'm sure they must be in heaven. And God bless the American army. They came and they were wonderful. There was an empty office building and they set up a kitchen downstairs and they brought us some cast to sleep in. But we were so anxious to go back to Hungary. I believed that my family must be back home. They told us the war is not over yet, we cannot go anywhere. And one day, two ladies came from the Red Cross. They were asking our ages. I mentioned they considered me between the young ones. I can't remember exactly, it was 4 or 5 girls. They took us away to a different area. And they explained to us if any of us wanted to go to any of the Scandinavian countries, families would adopt us and we would have a very good life. None of us wanted to go anywhere. I believed that my family must be back home. So now after it was sort of the end of May, they told us we could start to go back. The war is over, we could start to go back to Hungary. But every time we went to the train station to get a passenger train, the Russians were loading Germany. All you see these open wagons full of all kind of things, furniture, toilets, sinks, all kind of things. The first passenger train we got on, we didn't go too far. The area called Karlsbad, I think it was in Czechoslovakia, was a very famous resort place. There were a couple of ladies and they took us up to a beautiful building like a hotel. The first time we took a shower and we slept in a bed. He told us we could stay as long as we want. We just stayed one night. We were so anxious to go back to Hungary. Again, you waited for a passenger train. I can't remember how long it took. Then finally we arrived in Hungary. And there were a lot of young men at the stations. Most of them were survivors of the Holocaust. I was talking to this young man. He was asking my name and where I was from. You know, my mom had an older sister that lived in Budapest. And my uncle and I had two cousins. One was my age and one was 2 years younger. He told me that your aunt and uncle, the whole family is back in their own apartment. He said you could see them tomorrow. Well, I have to explain that actually Budapest is two cities, Buda and Pest, and there's a famous chain bridge that connects the two cities. And underneath the bridge, there is the Danube River. And I know where my aunt lived because in the summertime, my cousin would spend the summer with us. And Christmas time, when we didn't have school, we would go to Budapest. They had a beautiful amusement park, a circus. So it was a beautiful city. And my aunt lived in Pest. It wasn't far where I stayed. I got up very early the next morning and I came to the apartment. When I rang the bell, my Aunt Miriam opened the door and she looked at me. She said, "You look familiar, but I have no idea who you are." She hardly recognized me. That's when I find out what happened because the Russians liberated Auschwitz in 1945 April, and General Eisenhower with the army find all those death camps. So they know already that no one survived. And I could tell you, no matter how much I cried, nothing changed. My aunt said to me, "I don't know," because I told her I really don't want to live in the country anymore. My cousin was telling me when the Russians liberated and occupied the country, they didn't behave. So I didn't want to stay in the country anymore. My aunt said, "I don't know where you're going to go and settle. Just remember the kind of a family you came from." I was kind of sarcastic. I said to her, "I guess Hitler didn't respect our family." Then they told me I have to go to register. Everybody wanted to know how many people survived. I remember going to register and they gave me some money, but inflation was so that whatever you bought today, the next day cost double. I remember coming out from the building and I saw this young man sitting on a board, no legs, had a cup in his hand. You know, many of these young men were wounded during the war, became beggars on the street. I don't know how much that money was, but I looked at him. I thought he needed that more than I did, so I just put that money in his cup. And then my Aunt Miriam came with me to my hometown, and my neighbors were telling me that the mayor ran away, and there is a young man was liberated by the Russians. His name was Freddy Schwartz. He became the mayor. So my aunt and me went to meet him. I told him about my mom's watch. He said, maybe somebody find that he's going to ask people. He said, there is a room if I recognize something that belonged to us. I remember going into the room and I recognized two silver candle holders. You know, Jewish ladies light candles before Sabbath on Friday, before sundown. That was my mom's. So he gave me that. We went back to Budapest. And 2 weeks later, Freddie came to Budapest. He had my mom's watch. But you know, my aunt and uncle had to sell their valuables just to buy food. If you needed a piece of bread, you had to stand in line by the bakery. So I gave the watch to my uncle to sell. I needed clothes. I wanted to leave the country. When I came to Budapest, I wore my cousin's clothes. And then they told me about these young children between 5 and 6 years old. They were saved in an orphanage. And I went to meet them. You know, they didn't even remember their parents. And whenever they cried, I gave them a hug. And, you know, there were organizations arranged if you wanted to leave the country. And I told my aunt and uncle, I wanted to live with those children. There was a young woman with a little daughter with them. And, you know, when the time came, we were on the train already. You know, this Hungary was considered the Russian zone. And just before the train went over to the American zone, these Russian soldiers came up on the train and they were looking what everybody was carrying. When they looked in my knapsack and they saw the two silver candles, they took everything. But you know what? I didn't really care. You know, think that was important before everything changed, your values, your priorities. You know what was important? The children needed me, and that was very important to me. So the first stop in the American zone was Vienna, but we didn't stay there too long. They took us inside Germany to a DP camp. You know where the DP camp is? They call the displaced persons camp. All of us, thousands of us, young girls and young men, lost our families and our homes. So there was a lot of DP camp in Germany. This one that we went called Leipheim. And I know the American Red Cross and other organizations, the HIAS and the Joint, they had a community kitchen and they had some housing. And we were teaching the children how to write and read. And one day the children put on a little show. We had a little stage and the children were singing and dancing. In front of me, a girl turned around. I mentioned I became friends with those sisters. This was one of the sisters. When we came to Budapest, I stayed in Budapest. They went back to their home city. I didn't think ever going to see them again. Her name was Hannah. When I see her, it's like finding your own sister. She told me, we went to Budapest to look for you. And your aunt and uncle said, Martha is someplace in Germany. Maybe you're going to find her. It was really wonderful to see her. So she told me that the older sister was Bina. She was about 12 years older than I was. She married a young man that his wife and children were killed in Auschwitz. She stayed in Hungary. And she said, you know, my sister Gordy is here. She also married a neighbor, a young man that his wife and children were killed in Auschwitz. She was 10 years older than I was. And Esther, she was 2 years older than I was. She was the youngest. She was there too. And Hannah was 8 years older, and she also met this nice young man, and she married in the DP camp in Leipheim. You know, there were a lot of marriages. You know, when we came to Leipheim, it was 1946, and I stayed there in 1948. You know, we all had relatives in this country, but it was a long waiting list. And by this time, Goldie had a little baby boy, and Hannah had a little baby girl. And there was another couple who had a little baby boy the same age as Goldie's. But that little baby didn't develop the right way, you know. And they already had papers to come to this country, and they were not allowed to bring the baby. They had to leave the baby in an institution in Germany, you know. That made me very sad. There was a lot of marriages, you know, people were lonely. I remember when this young man asked me to go for a walk, and I said, no, I'm really sorry. He got so angry at me. He said, what's wrong with you? You know, I always remember when my sister and I was teenagers, my mom would always tell us, always dress like a lady and be a lady because your reputation will follow you for the rest of your life. Well, I didn't have anybody to watch over me, and, you know, I had to watch over myself. And then one day we heard an announcement that if we wanted to go to Canada, families would sponsor us. You know, everybody wanted to get out from Europe. We considered the whole Europe like a big cemetery. So Esther and I signed up and we went to Canada. We were on the ship, you know, we meet a lot of people. One day I was walking around and there was a young man walking and he had on a suit. I had on a suit from the same fabric. So he was standing next to me and he said, "You look like husband and wife." I said, "No, we look like sister and brother." And, you know, he was telling me that his mother and his sister were killed in Auschwitz. And he said, "You know, my father remarried." A couple of days later, I met his father and his stepmother. I was talking to his stepmother. He was asking me my name, where I was from. And she said to me, "Do you know, I was in your home. My brother was a teacher in your town." I really didn't remember her or her brother, but I do remember his name was Frommer and he had a very good voice. And everybody was always talking about Frommer became very famous. He became a cantor. You know, where the cantor is, they sing in a synagogue. All I remembered that he became a cantor. That's how I remembered Frommer, her brother. And now this young man kept on following me around. You know, it was very uncomfortable. I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I thought to myself I could say a little white lie. I said to him, "You know, I have relatives in New York, and there's a young man waiting for me there." Actually, it was true. I didn't even know. So finally, we arrived in Canada, in Toronto, and I stayed with a family in the suburb of Toronto. I still remember the address called Relmar Gardens, and the name was Feinberg. They had two little boys, and I help with the little boys whenever I can. Good. And I used to meet Esther, and we used to go to school at night. And you know, that uncle I mentioned, he was a chief rabbi. They came to this country, probably was the last ship, must have been around 1938. So I wrote to them where I was in Canada. And my uncle wrote to this family to please let me come to New York to be with relatives. Everybody said to me, "You're not going to like New York. Canada is so much nicer." Well, Canada was very nice, but it wasn't not exciting because I know a lot of teenagers went to New York. I can't remember exactly if I went to New York in 1949 or 1950. I lived with my Aunt Frida, my father's older sister. She had two married daughters and a married son. She has grandchildren. And you know, all my cousins spoke Hungarian because when my aunts came to this country, they had babies and they really didn't speak the language yet. So I had no problem communicating with my cousins. And then I find a job not too far. I didn't have to travel. This girl from Europe owned the shop. She made children clothes, and most of the girls were refugees from Europe. So during the day I worked, and at night I went to school. And my Aunt Frida said one day, "You know, I have a niece, Ellie, and her husband, Morris. They would like to meet you." So people visited either at the weekend or at night. They didn't live too far. So one night we went to visit Ellie and Morris. They also speak Hungarian. And the young man came in. Morris had a brother named Sidney, a single young man. So we spent a couple of hours. Just before we left, Sidney asked me for my telephone number. Excuse me. Well, I didn't have my own telephone, so I said to him, "You know, your sister-in-law Ellie has my Aunt Frida's telephone number." But after we left, Aunt Frida said, "You know, it wasn't very nice the way you said that to him." But I said, "You know, I never dated. I had no idea what was the rules over here. And I had my own plan. I thought I'm going to work hard, save up some money, and get my own place." So it took a lot of conversation between my Aunt Frida and her niece Ellie. A couple of days later, Sidney called me up and asked me out for a date. So I said to him, "You know, I have school that night." So he said, "Well, what is more important?" Well, I didn't want to hurt his feeling again. So I said, okay. He was the youngest of five. He had two older brothers and two older sisters. As a matter of fact, one of the sisters was married before the war, and she was in Auschwitz. She had a little daughter that was killed in there, and she even had number on her arms. She was taken. Hungary was the last country that the Nazis invaded, so she had numbers on her arms too. So whenever Sydney talked about the family, it felt so familiar. So we dated for a while, and he told me he wants to marry me. But I was so afraid to show any feelings. So I said to him, don't say anything to anybody. Let's take our time, get to know each other a little bit more. But by the time I went back to my Aunt Frida's house, everybody knew that I'm going to marry him. And one day he called me up. He said, it's very hot in New York, and his sisters have young children. They go up to the Catskill Mountains for the summer. And he said, I have a friend, Ernie. He has a car. His wife and his little daughter is there. And he said, Sunday he's going to take us there. He said, bring a pretty dress. Everybody dresses up for dinner. So Sunday came and he took us up in the mountains. Everybody had a little bungalow, and dinner time, everybody's all dressed up, going into the dining room. And we were inside in the bungalow with Sydney, and everybody left. And I said, it's not really very nice to stay alone. It's not proper. Singles to stay alone. We better go. He said, we don't have to rush. But as soon as we opened the dining room door, everybody was yelling, surprise. It was an engagement party, a surprise engagement party for us, excuse me. I used to tease him. I said, you really tricked me. I didn't want to embarrass you in front of everybody, so I accepted. So we got married in 1950, December the 3rd. And in 1951, September the 16th, I had a son, Harvey. And 2 years later, in July, I had a daughter, Karen. And 11 months later, in June, I had a daughter, Linda. And we lived in the Bronx. My children were old enough to go outside to play. I was always watching over them. My son used to tell me, Mom, you don't have to be afraid. This is a free country. So when my children became school age, what you call a parochial school, my children went to yeshiva. And when my son was 12 years old, we needed a bigger place. We just had a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. So we bought a house in Teaneck, New Jersey, not far from the George Washington Bridge. And Karen and Linda told me, Mom, we never had friends in the neighborhood. Can we go to public school? The schools were very good in Teaneck. The girls went to public school, and Harvey stayed in yeshiva. He graduated from Yeshiva University High School, and he went to NYU College, and he wanted to go to medical school. He went to Rutgers. It's a state medical school. And when he wanted to do internship, he came to California to UCLA. He became a psychiatrist and a pharmacologist. And then he met this nice young lady, Laura, and he married in 1980 in January. And Karen also went to a state college. Douglas was a girls' college, and she wanted to be an audiologist. So she got her master's degree in audiology from Columbia University in New York. And he also met a nice young man from the next town, Bergenfield, David. And she also married in 1980 in October. And Linda was a very good student. She skipped 1 year high school. She never applied for college, but where we lived in Teaneck, there was a university, Fairleigh Dickinson University. So she enrolled in there. And then she met this nice young man, Stephen, and they fell in love. Linda and Stephen got married in 1973 in September. It was a holiday weekend. And in 1974, September the 20th, the most wonderful thing happened. I had a granddaughter. I saw this shirt in a souvenir shop. It said, if I would have known grandchildren are so much fun, I would have had them first. That Irma Bombeck said that first. Yeah, grandchildren are wonderful. And I still have time, or shall I wait for some questions? Do I still have time to continue? Anyway, in 1983, all of us survivors went to Washington to thank America. President Reagan was in the White House, and President Reagan came with Mrs. Reagan, and he made a very nice speech. He told us that we find a safe haven in this country. Nobody ever gonna harm us. But we also mentioned when Hitler came to power, Mr. Churchill said we have to stop him. But they called Mr. Churchill a warmonger, you know, and unfortunately Hitler did whatever he started out to do. And unfortunately, my husband had Alzheimer's. He passed away in 2016. And my children asked me what I wanted to do for my 90th birthday. I told them I wanted to go to Disneyland. You know, I had a reason. You know, in Russia, when that reactor blew up Chernobyl, they brought some Russian children here and they asked them what they liked in America the best. They told Disneyland, everybody is so happy there. I told my children, I want to see everybody happy. So, you know, my granddaughter, her name is Tara Sands, you know, she was a drama major. She did some off-Broadway shows and she came to California. She does audio books and cartoon voices, Pokemon and commercials. So she wrote to Disneyland and they were very nice. You know, they gave us a private tour guide. They gave me a big button with my birthday and they gave me Mickey's hat with my name on it. And we met Mickey. Well, I wanted to know from Mickey's, you know, I was here in 1980 when my son got married. And I said, look at me, I'm an old lady, and how come you still look the same? Well, Mickey doesn't speak, he just gave me a hug. We made a lot of pictures with Mickey. Am I still have time or shall I continue? Anybody could hear me?
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. We do have time for questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box. In the meantime, I have a question for you, Martha. Can you please share with the audience when you started sharing your story with people and with specifically with your family and then with other audience?
I never really told anybody, you know, but in 1994, somebody called me that Yale University wanted to take testimonies from Holocaust survivors. So I made a tape, a 2-hour, very, very detailed tape. That's the first time my children and my husband heard about the story. And just before I came to California, I went to a school. It was at Christmas time. The children were very young, like they were 12 years old, and I was worried they shouldn't be scared. So I told them my favorite time, Christmas time, you know. And that was the first time I talked to the children. And then when I came here, I think it was in January that I spoke at the Museum of Tolerance and then in the Holocaust Museum.
Thank you so much. We have a question here. One of our audience members said, what can I, as an Austrian teenager, do to remember the victims and help take responsibility for Austria's and Germany's history?
Well, you know, it's important to get to know one another and tell that we have to live in this world with each other in peace and get to know one another and never hate anybody. You know, when people sometimes say, I wouldn't go to Germany, you know, this is the third generation. They can't be responsible for what happened, what their grandfather and father did, you know. We want to live in peace. We want to mend the world. Everybody has the right. We have plenty of everything for everybody. You know, that makes me sad that after all that, you know, technology, everything is so advanced and they can't figure out how to live in peace with everybody.
Thank you so much for that answer. Can you talk a little bit about the displaced persons camp and what that was like, what it was like to live in a DP camp?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we all had the same experience, so we understood one another, you know. It was interesting, and you always wanted to, you know, I know I wanted to come to this country. I wanted to have children and grandchildren, that was important because we gave the name after the family that passed away for our children and grandchildren, so that I always wanted to do that. And my father used to talk about this country, when you heard about America, it sounded like haven, so I always wanted to come to this country.
Thank you so much. If you could please remind the audience, how old were you when you were first deported, and how old were you when you got out, when you were liberated?
Well, I became 18 when I worked in a factory. We never know age, times, what time, but it's interesting. That day, somebody said November 17. That's when I became 18. I worked in a factory.
Thank you very much. Did you ever find out what happened to your family?
Well, but we find out, that they were all gassed and cremated in Auschwitz in the crematorium. And I even thankful because how many they find in ditches, how many bodies they find in ditches. So just I'm thankful that they didn't wind up in a ditch.
When you first started sharing your story with people, was it difficult, and has it gotten easier over the years?
When I made that tape in 1994, I cried through because the first time I really talked about everything, and then, I try not to be emotional because I didn't want the children to worry or cry, and I think it was also when we have a organization, the survivors, and then we went to Washington. So everybody was talking about it, and it was easier because I realized that a lot of people feel the same way. We felt a lot of guilt because I'm alive and not my family. That made it was hard. It was very difficult. But I was a responsible person. I had children, family. So I couldn't really dwell on things because I had to take care of my family.
Thank you very much. How did you feel when your aunt didn't recognize you?
Well, it was really difficult, it was very difficult, but because I didn't want them to worry about me, so I just always tried to be brave, I didn't want them to worry. But I cried when nobody saw me during the night. Most of the time I cried myself to sleep.
Thank you. Was there anything that gave you hope while you were in Auschwitz?
The what?
Was there anything that gave you hope during this time when you were in Auschwitz?
When we were in Auschwitz, we were together, we were always saying, if we ever get out from there and the world is going to find out about it, it's going to change for the better. But unfortunately, it didn't happen that way.
Thank you. Since we are still in Passover, can you please share with us some memories that you have of celebrating Passover with your family in Hungary before the
Yes,
Holocaust?
it was wonderful. And like I said, we were looking forward to meeting, when we could travel to hire a carriage and go to my grandma and all the other relatives came. So that was very exciting, because we lived in different areas, but to get together every year, that was really wonderful. I have wonderful memories because it was such a peaceful place, and I'm thankful that I had those good memories from my childhood.
Thank you very much. Do you remember, what do you remember about your grandparents?
I only know my father's father, you know, he was very, very old. You know what I remember? Every Saturday afternoon, we could go and visit. He was very old. You know what they call a snuff box? He would let us smell that, you know. That's how I remember, because he was very, very old. I remember his funeral. And my other grandfather, my mom's, I don't know, he must have died very young, because either my mom didn't remember her father. Only my grandmother, I remembered my grandmother. You know, I remember the food when we used to come to visit, what she cooked. And, you know, it was, he had a special treat for us. If we finished our lunch, then he gave us, you know, they brought from Italy orange and dates and figs, you know, that was a special treat. If we finished our lunch, he always gave us a special treat.
Thank you very much. Are your cousins who stayed with you at the end of the war, do they still live in Hungary, or did their families continue to live there?
No, you know, from my father's side, cousins I never met after. Two survived. I think one went to Israel, but I never met after the war. But my cousins from my mother's side, I still have one lives in Israel and one in Brooklyn. This one has 34 grandchildren and countless great grandchildren. You know, she was telling me one day they were together, and she said to her son, "They are all mine." So the son said, "Yes, mom, this is the way we're getting even with Hitler, having children and loving them and teach them love." He never wanted to say anything bad about, you know, it's not fair to start all over again. We want to live in peace with everybody.
Thank you very much. Do you think that your experiences surviving the Holocaust influenced your worldview and the things that you see as, that you hold as priorities?
You know, many a times I'm thinking, you know, I know how different I have three children, how different their personalities is. But I was really fortunate enough to have the kind of a parent. My mom was always there, sharing, helping everybody, you know, that was important. And my father to be a responsible person, you know, maybe we weren't as sophisticated, but whatever we did, we had to be responsible, you know, and I think that was very important. And I won't tell you, I never lost faith in God. And I believe when somebody passes, their soul goes to heaven with God.
Thank you very much. Have you ever considered writing a book about your life?
No, I really didn't, because when I made that tape, two are very detailed. So I really, I wanted my children to know all that. And that was important for me, to my children to know.
Thank you. Where do you live now?
Well, I am in actually they call it the independent living, but most of the people need assistance already. In Culver City, called Palm Court.
Thank you very much. And if you could please remind us, how many children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren do you have?
I have three children, two daughters and a son, and I have three grandchildren, daughter Tara, my granddaughter, and two grandsons, Jordan and Alex. Jordan works for CNN, and Alex is a director already. He works in a hospital with some fertility doctors. You know, and I mentioned my granddaughter, Tara, she does audiobooks and cartoon voices and commercials. And then I have two great grandsons. One is about 13 months old, Julian, and the younger one, Max, is about 8 months old. And I see them on those little, I have this called Alexa, this little machine, then I could see them. I hope hopefully my daughter said maybe by June they could all come to visit, hopefully.
Well, I certainly hope so as well. And I see that you have some family watching this talk as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Is there anything that you would like to add about anybody who's watching?
Well, just everybody to love each other, care about each other, be kind to one another, and we have a wonderful president and vice president, and the future looks wonderful, and I'm happy about that.
Thank you very much. When you were liberated, did you know that you were being liberated, or were you hesitant towards the Allied soldiers?
No, they told us we were liberated, and like I said, that the army, they were just wonderful. They even gave us a concert. They were really. It was hard to even believe after what we lived through that people were so kind, really. Not only that, but we had a chaplain, and she asked me if I had relatives in America. And as soon as I told him, the next day he already knew the telephone number and the address of my uncles.
Thank you. Do you have anything from your childhood?
Well, a couple of pictures that my aunts that came to this country, they have the pictures. I never find anything, nothing that from my childhood, nothing, just the last picture that my cousin was getting married and we were there, they made, photographer came to the house and they made pictures of us. I'm trying to see, I have it here. I don't know if I could show it.
Oh, yes, we see that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
This is the only picture I have of my father. This was when he went to medical school in New York. This is the only picture of my father. And then my mom as a young lady, a young girl. And then, you Jewish ladies, if you're religious, you wear a wig, you cut your hair off and you wear a wig. That's my.
Thank you so much for sharing those photos. And it's so wonderful that you have them and that you can share them here with us. Did you ever see anybody, the girls who you were in the camp with, again after the war?
Well, we kept in touch. Esther's daughter, I keep in touch with Esther's daughter, Anybody that was in this country, we kept in touch. That was very important. We were good friends. Unfortunately, they all passed away. They were all older than I was.
Thank you for sharing. What would you like people to take away? If there's a message that you could share with everybody who listens to your story that you would like everybody to take away from this, what would you like that to be?
Well, everybody should know we all got children, we all related, and everybody has a right to live their own life and to be kind to one another. We would like the world to be peaceful, loving for our future, for our children, our great-grandchildren, that would be wonderful. I think, but I would like to know women like Whoopi Goldberg or Oprah go to these countries and tell them how much more beneficial it would be to live in peace with everybody rather than nobody wins in the war. It costs so much and young people have to die. And I would like to see a peaceful world, it would be time. They never tried it. Wouldn't it be nice to have a peaceful world? Nobody ever hate each other or kill each other. That would be the best. And have some gun control.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us this afternoon. As I shared with the audience, Martha has participated in our educational programs for the last couple of years. It's about the last 4 years or so. And it's such an honor to have you in our community sharing your messages with us and particularly with young students to whom you speak on a regular basis, even now during pandemic on Zoom. thank you so much for sharing with us. And we wish you a very happy rest of Passover, and same to the rest of our viewers who are observing Passover, and happy Easter as well to everyone who is observing Easter on Sunday. Martha, thank you so much. And as a reminder to everybody, we hope to welcome you to the museum in person when we reopen, whenever that is. But in the meantime, please follow our website for our virtual programs and our social media as well.
Thank you, Michael. Have a good day. Thank you, everybody. I wish I could see everybody. Maybe next time.
Hopefully soon. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much. Thank you, Michael.